Welcome to our third and final discussion in the Building Las Vegas Summer Series. I am Michelle Light, the Director of Special Collections and Archives at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas Libraries. First, I would like to thank our co-sponsors of the event tonight, along with the UNLV Libraries, AIA Las Vegas, the UNLV Downtown Design Center, and Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits. UNLV TV and KUNV are also here tonight to record our panel. Special Collections and Archives has been collecting the history of Southern Nevada for 50 years now, and throughout our collections, you can find evidence of how important water has always been to making this city possible in the desert. From the earliest settlers, the railroad, the Las Vegas Land and Water Company in the early 20th century, to our 21st century concerns about Lake Mead, water conservation, flood control, or sustainability. Last year, thanks to startup funding from the Tiberti family, the UNLV Libraries launched a 5-year project to focus on collecting and preserving the history of building Las Vegas. We've collected over 125 oral histories from individuals who've played a significant role in our region's growth. And it's no surprise that in a desert, almost everyone mentions or alludes to water. We've organized the Building Las Vegas Summer Series to raise awareness about our efforts to collect the region's history, but also to share some of the most compelling stories and insights we've heard about the people, the organizations, the forces and challenges that have shaped our city. So tonight you're in for a treat as we hear 4 very different perspectives about the role of water in our region's development. But first I want to make a personal appeal again. Several of you in the audience have played a role in the history of building Las Vegas, and perhaps you might be interested in sharing your story too. So I would like to introduce Stephanie Evans, the Building Las Vegas project coordinator, who is in the back. Wave your hand. She would be happy to interview you, or if you have a recommendation of someone she should interview for the project, please speak with her. Perhaps you might have historical records stashed in your garage or under your bed about your role or your business's efforts to develop our region. And if so, I would like for you to meet Peter Michel, the curator in Special Collections and Archives. He would be very happy to talk with you about donating your archives to UNLV so we can make sure that future generations can learn from our past. You all can help us ensure that we save the history of this unique desert town, and with your help, we can make this history available online for anyone around the world to appreciate. I also want to point out the photographs along the side and the photographs you saw in the PowerPoint earlier. They're taken by Aaron Mays, our visual materials curator, who has been photographing the region. And if you are interested in learning more about his work in documenting the city through photographs, please speak with him. We also have a brochure about the project if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing. The Building Las Vegas project reflects the very strong community mission of the UNLV Libraries. So I would now like to introduce the Dean of the Libraries, Maggie Farrell, to say a few words.
Okay, thank you. Let me add my welcome this evening. We're so glad that you've joined us. Libraries are about conversations, documenting our past, sharing knowledge, and informing our future. So your interest this evening in Building Las Vegas contributes to an ongoing dialogue. The Special Collections and Archives has been dedicated to our community story for 50 years. And this year, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary, our 50th birthday of collecting, preserving, and telling that story. Within the lead library on campus, we have an exhibit of 50 treasures for 50 years. We hope that you come by campus to see it. And we also have some brochures if you'd like to know more about 50 treasures documenting our 50 years. Also, we are topping off our birthday. Every birthday needs a birthday cake, needs a birthday celebration. So we will host a gold party on Saturday, November 4th. We ask you to save that date. There are some save the date cards in the back of the room, and tickets will go on sale shortly. So we hope that you'll be able to join us in that celebration on November the 4th. Again, thank you very much for coming, and I'll turn it back over to Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Farrell. I would now like to introduce Clay T. White, the inaugural director of the Oral History Research Center in the libraries. She will be moderating the panel tonight and encouraging all our esteemed panelists to share more about themselves. So let's welcome Clay T. to the stage and begin tonight's discussion.
Thank you. Good evening. So I would like to invite the panelists to come up and join me, and I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order. First, Jay Bingham. Jay, if you would come up this way, and you don't have to bring your gifts. I'm not going to let anyone bother it. So Jay has wonderful stories that he's going to share this evening. He is the owner and president of JDB. Robert Lewis. Robert Lewis is president of the Nevada Division Lewis Group of Companies. Thank you. Pat Mulroy. Pat is a senior fellow, the William S. Boyd School of Law at UNLV. And Virginia Valentine is president of the Nevada Resort Association. So you're in for a treat. Please sit back, relax. And once the panel discussion ends, you will have the opportunity to ask some questions. So please, if you can hold those questions till the end, there is a microphone that you'll be using right there. So to get started, I'm just going to allow everybody to answer this first question, and you may do it in any order that you like. Tell me how you have been involved in water in Southern Nevada. I'd like for you to limit, so Pat, I would like for you to limit your answer.
I think Jay Bingham needs to go first. Well, I started at the Las Vegas Valley Water District as the Deputy General Manager in 1985. And 4 years later, when the valley was exploding in growth and we were rapidly running out of water, I became the General Manager of the Water District. And then when the Southern Nevada Water Authority was created in the early 90s, I became its first General Manager. And I was general manager of both until February of 2014, at which time I retired finally.
Virginia, would you like to take that question?
Yes, my background is civil engineering, and I, in 1986, became the first chief engineer and general manager of the Clark County Regional Flood Control District, and that happened on the heels of some devastating flooding in '83 and '84. There was a loss of life, a lot of property loss and damage, and we had a very small amount of money given by the legislature to prepare a master plan and to hire the chief engineer. I actually started out wanting to work on the master plan and wound up being the chief engineer, but probably worked out for the best. So that's began my involvement with flooding, at least in the desert.
Jay?
I was elected at Board of County Commissioners in 1984, and that's when Pat was talking about we were running out of water and we needed to hire somebody, and I wholeheartedly wanted to hire Pat because she was the most qualified person. The story behind that is I was kind of new on the board, and it was a 6-to-1 vote. I voted against Pat Mulroy. And the reason why, I didn't think she was tough enough. Boy, was I wrong. Over the years, she proved me every day how wrong I was. I just didn't know her that well, and I said, I just don't know if she can take on those guys in Arizona and New Mexico and California. I just don't know if she's tough enough. Believe me, she was tough enough.
Robert, please.
I am part of a home building family. We started building in Las Vegas in 1961, and I've lived here since 1972, and my involvement with water is it's hard to build a house and sell it to somebody if there's no water, so I paid a lot of attention to making sure water would be available.
I know I'll have the opportunity, but neither of them told the truth.
I know that. I know. I'm listening too. What do you think was the most important moment in Southern Nevada's water history, and why was it so important? There's a great story here, so please listen carefully.
Let me tell my side of it. I had left the Convention Authority. Nobody leaves the Convention Authority. Everybody wants to serve on the Convention Authority, but I knew that there was challenges with water. And I had left the Convention Authority, and I said, I'm going to go back. I want to be the president of the water district. I was in the building business. I knew a little bit about it. And the former head of the water district came to me one day and said, we're out of water. I said, well, what do you mean we're out of water? We're out of water. What does that mean? And he couldn't explain it. And that's when the change came about. And we hired Mulroy just shortly after that. And that was probably the best decision I ever made in local government, was to hire somebody that wouldn't just come to me and say we're out of water, that would find solutions how to solve those problems to get water for the valley.
The most significant thing that happened in Southern Nevada was the creation of the Southern Nevada Water Authority. Had the Southern Nevada Water Authority not been created, had the various water agencies and the municipalities and the county not put their guns down, stopped competing, and started cooperating, we would have been done in 1989. And to that end, there's someone sitting on this stage without whom that never would have happened. It required a tremendous amount of political leadership. As you can well imagine, going to Clark County was the 800-pound gorilla and saying, you need to let go of some of the authority that you have as the water district. You need to share some of that authority, was not easy. There was one man who saw it right away and who helped maneuver through those politics. Without him, there wouldn't be a Southern Nevada Water Authority. This community owes Jay Bingham an enormous debt of gratitude.
Let me share with you why that's so important. When that former head of the water district come to me, the problem was, and Pat can tell you this more in detail, all the cities were taking water off the board, basically. We had water, but they were taking it off the board for their own growth needs. But they weren't using it, but it was off the board. If I remember that right, they were taking it off, and so when you looked at the pie, there was no more water, because all the municipalities were fighting for this growth they wanted in their own municipalities, and they were just taking the water off the board, you know. And so that's when it happened, when we said there is no more water. And that's when we decided we've got to get together and work together as a total community, not one city of Las Vegas, Henderson, North Las Vegas, and Clark County. We've got to get the whole group together to solve this overall problem.
So is anyone going to talk about the Valentine's Day massacre?
Well, since I was the executor in charge, yes. I had nothing to do with that. We had done an audit, if you will, of how many water commitments we had out there, and how much water we actually had available to meet those commitments, and we didn't have it. We had made commitments for which there was no water to back it up. And so our liabilities were hanging out all over the place. So on February 14th, Valentine's Day, 1990, I had to announce that we were going to take a temporary breather and declare a temporary moratorium on making any more commitments. Now, the good news was there were so many commitments already in the pipeline that when it came to actual construction and the development part of it, it never really stopped. The only thing that stopped was the commitment process. And it was having to retool the commitment process from the ground up to where it was a much more robust way to give water, to where you wouldn't have one developer with water and next door on the next piece of land there was a developer without water, and the one with water hadn't built anything, had no intention of putting it to beneficial use, but what he could do is sell his land for more money because there was a water commitment tied to it. And that's where leadership by men like Robert Lewis came in very handy, because we worked incredibly hard with the development community to come up with a new commitment process. And at the end of the day, it was creating the Southern Nevada Water Authority that allowed us to open the door. Because the minute we created it, we could enter into a contract with the federal government for our return flows. Prior to that, there was no agency that could make a commitment for both the water and the wastewater agencies that was willing to assume the responsibility to budget the water in the community. Once we did it, we could sign that contract immediately, and that allowed the doors to be reopened.
Tell them what a return flow credit is.
Every gallon of wastewater that goes to the sewer system gets treated and returned to the Colorado River. So 93% of all wastewater that is created in Southern Nevada is recycled.
So, Virginia, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add that that was also somewhat of a defining moment for our industry. It was sort of a wake-up call to us that we needed to be cooperating with the water agencies, that we had to be more than just customers or consumers of it. It was part of our job to make sure that they would be able to supply us our current needs and plan for future needs. And that's something we really appreciated, the will of the local governments to get behind the water authority and tell them to solve problems for the long term.
So, Virginia, I just heard the term wastewater. Can you talk about that significance for us?
Well, of course, wastewater and floodwater are different. And I would, just to add to what Pat said, I think the defining moment, at least with flood control, was the creation of the flood control district. And I think for a lot of the same reasons that the SNWA was a defining moment for water issues, and that was that you had, and she mentioned one of the points, which is you had, for the 6 local governments in Clark County, one agency who was dealing with the federal government. So we dealt with the Corps of Engineers. We dealt with the Federal Emergency Management Agency on floodplain mapping. We had elected boards, so we had a very high level of leadership with the elected officials, and they were absolutely fabulous. A lot of them worked very, very hard to see that these programs are successful. Jay Bingham and Robert Lewis both worked on the campaign to get funding for the flood control district. So I would say for a lot of the same reasons, and she mentioned the multi-jurisdictional nature. The Las Vegas Wash starts up in North Las Vegas. It flows through the city of Las Vegas. It flows through Clark County, comes close to Henderson. So in the past, people had stopped and started their projects with their developments, and there was no grand plan about where that water was going to go after it left a little piece of channel maybe that you put in. So it was really a coordinated effort. Just the plan alone had a lot of value, but I would say that was the defining moment for us.
And let me add to that my experience since. One of the biggest problems that the eastern cities are having are combined storm sewer systems. Every time they are confronted with a Hurricane Sandy or Hurricane Hugo or whatever it is, their storm sewers overflow and contaminated water goes into their rivers and streams because it wasn't built, the capacity, didn't have the capacity for it. Well, what Virginia built separated the two to where you weren't going to run into this combined storm sewer issue, to where you were going to have, every time it flooded, every sewer manhole coming up and depositing contaminated, highly dangerous, highly contaminated water out into the roadways.
Let me just share a story about, I was talking to Virginia before that. Before I was at the county commission, I was elected to the North Las Vegas City Council, and we had some funding that was available. And our public works director, Gary Haller, came to me one day and he said, he called me one night, it was raining in North Las Vegas. He said, I want you to go for a ride with me. I said, where are we going? He goes, just come go with me. Now back then out on Craig Road, there was nothing north of Craig Road. There was nothing north of Cheyenne. But we rode out there and I seen the worst thing I'd ever seen. I seen water running at about 50 miles an hour, probably a half a mile wide, taking everything in its path. And we had just lost a public works employee earlier with that challenge. And he said to me, I want the funds, some of these funds, to build a detention basin. And I said, what will that do? And he told me, we'll capture the water and we'll use it over a time period to release it. And I said, well, I grew up on a farm. That's kind of what we did up there. He said, yeah, but this is a bigger scale. And that was the first experience I had with flood control, was voting for that, to put that in clear on the north side of town. Doesn't do any good on the south side of town if you don't do it on the north side of town.
I'd like to talk about some of the largest barriers that we've faced in terms of water supply, water management, or flood control, whatever you'd like to talk about. And I'd like to know how we should overcome, or how we have overcome some of these barriers.
Oh, I would say one of the initial problems was there was a lack of planning and there was a lack of a multi-jurisdictional kind of approach. But before that even, I think we had a problem with people not really understanding water in the desert, whether it's flood water or water supply. So when we first went out and we would talk to people about supporting a ballot question for flood control, we would walk into a room, and this is, we're getting into a time when there were thousands of people moving here every month. They'd never seen a storm in the desert. They might have never seen it rain, actually, in Las Vegas. And we would say, well, we're going to build these massive channels and detention bases and bridges over, if any of you have been here for a while, what we call dip structures. So you have, basically, you just drove through a wash. There might not be water there. And we said, we're going to build bridges, and they had no vision of it. So I think even with the development community, who I think really stepped up, you look out on these alluvial fans, which is that steep slope that transitions the mountain to the valley, and it's like pouring water on this tabletop. It just runs off. There's no river system for it to go to like you see in more in wetter areas. So I think one of the big challenges was getting people to understand how it was important to them. And even if they didn't have water running through their living room, well, it was really important that if their kids were going to ride that bus home from school and had to go through the Charleston Underpass, or if they needed to get to UMC, or, and we did have water going through people's houses at some point, or if they did have water, how they could now participate in the National Flood Insurance Program because of the projects we were doing and the floodplain mapping we were doing. So I would say one of the early obstacles was helping people understand and educating people and communicating with people so they understood why there was a need even to build flood control facilities.
That necessity to have the public be your partner in building infrastructure, implementing programs cannot be understated. I mean, Virginia's absolutely right. For us, conservation was an enormous issue. And we had to, my deputy, Dick Wimmer, used to laugh that he was joining Dick Bryan at the opening of every 7-Eleven around town when he was running for office, telling the story about why we need to conserve, and with facts and data, telling people what needed to happen. And this is where, and I have told this story around the country, there's something magical about the business community of Southern Nevada. When they see a need, whether it's the development community or the gaming community, they step up to the plate. I'll never forget when we first started conservation and we had no funding for it. We hadn't included it in the district's budget. There was no way for us to generate the kind of money we needed initially. I sat down with Steve Wynn. I laid out exactly what the issue was. In fact, Jay, I think you came with me to that meeting. And Jay and I walked out of that office with a check for $100,000. And he said, go up and down the strip and make them match me. That's Las Vegas. It's when individuals like Robert Lewis quickly recognize the dilemmas around flood control, the dilemmas around water, and they don't just sit back. I mean, poor Robert, we have made him sit on every integrated resource planning committee that Southern Nevada has had. And that original 1.2 billion, and I used to call it 1,200,000 million because the B word couldn't come out of my mouth. That 1.2 billion in original infrastructure, the second intake, all that necessary critical infrastructure that quite frankly saved us in the early drought years would not have happened had Robert Lewis and Richard Bunker not cut a financial deal, a funding deal about how the taxes were going to be implemented, who was going to pay what piece. It was that moment that made it all possible. And I have lauded this community for its resilience, its nimbleness, and its willingness to do what needs to be done and not sit there and wring its hands for 15 years, second-guessing itself.
For those in the audience, Pat, share with them, we get, I think the numbers are probably still the same, 300,000 acre-feet out of the Colorado, pretty close to that, plus we put return flows in. Arizona gets?
2.8.
Utah gets?
Utah gets about 1.86.
I mean, all up and down the Colorado, they get large amounts of water. We got 300,000 because we were not a farming community when the dam was built. That's what we had to live on when this thing turned around. So when that Valentine's Day thing hit, we could have rolled up and said, okay, this is as big as this town's going to get. This is it. But between, like Pat says, the business community and everybody else, we're still growing today, and the future is still very bright. And still people, those public companies still bet on the businesses in this town because of that.
You know, also from the perspective of the business community, we were happy that we were invited to the table by Pat and Virginia, Jay, everybody, that we had a willingness to help solve the problem, but somebody had to allow us to be a participant, and that's something we really appreciated, just to have that opportunity.
So with all of this hope and optimism, are we going to have water 100 years from now?
Yes.
So
the answer is very simply yes. I mean, yes, the Colorado River has been hit by climate change, and it is going to go through decimating periods. But 7 states who formerly couldn't talk to each other, 2 countries that formerly couldn't talk to each other, are problem solving together. So the robustness of solutions that brings to the table is pretty profound. I mean, that all groundwater basins up and down the river can play a role in solving the problem, that conservation efforts up and down the river can solve the problem, that Mexico was probably the single biggest reason Lake Mead wasn't 10 feet lower last year than it is now, because they left water behind. That willingness to find common solutions and quit competing and figure out what needs to be done, what is that next generation of agreement that we have to have, is invaluable. I mean, there's one thing we've always said to ourselves every single day: failure's not an option. It's just not an option.
wonderful. Anyone else want to comment?
I said this a while back and the other day when I was visiting at the university. One of the great mottos that in my 15 years in politics, and I said this many times on the board, the greatest joy is for a mother and father to bring a paycheck home on Friday night. And that was one of the things I strive for the most, is to make sure that that was going to continue to happen for families. And we had to have this kind of this kind of planning and different things so that that could continue to have. There's not a greater experience in life than to bring a paycheck home, because when you don't, it really sets a family back.
So Regarding water, what does a thriving, successful Southern Nevada look like to you? And how close are we to your vision, your ideal?
I think a thriving, successful Southern Nevada, I mean, I would say we're about 3/4 of the way there. And it's a matter of attitude. Southern Nevadans take their water supply seriously. Southern Nevadans have become extremely frugal. They are the poster child for conservation across the country. I found it highly amusing when 18 months ago, Los Angeles adopted the same outdoor incentive programs to convert landscaping that we did years and years ago. It makes a big difference. And I think that that kind of community involvement and community engagement makes or breaks you.
Wonderful. Virginia?
Well, I maybe could speak to this from flood control, but since I'm wearing my other hat as the president of the Nevada Resort Association, I have to say that at least from the resort industry, most of the water that they are using is going back in the lake and being pumped back, cleaned up, and pumped back out for return flow credits, which Pat explained. So there's very little consumptive use that goes on. Even the decorative water features are not out of that same pot of, that same allocation of Colorado River water. That's for the most part low quality, shallow groundwater that probably comes from those of us upstream overwatering our lawns. So I'll say they're very good water users, and they want to continue to grow. So in my mind, I think there will be water. I think a healthy, vibrant community looks like one that still has options. It can grow, it can change the way it grows. You know, conservation is very important, and I do think communicating, explaining why you should conserve is, and I think Pat and the SNWA do a beautiful job with those. You've all seen their ads, and they're just brilliant. I remember a guy who worked for me at the flood control district said once, he said, "Why should I conserve water?" He goes, I don't want the town to grow. He says, "I'm just going to flush twice every time I go." So, and because there was that kind of mentality, and that's why I think one of the most challenging things is the change. So my idea of successful community is one that still has options to grow. It can still change its kind of development. It can still, you know, re-innovate, be creative, use technology. From a flood control's perspective, I always thought success would be building myself out of a job. We'd finished the master plan, but that's not what happened, because what happened is the boundaries of the valley continued to expand, and so the master plan grew with the valley, and I think that'll continue to happen. So those of us who are trying to keep up with the Robert Lewis's of the world are always going to be probably a step behind with the infrastructure. So. But yeah, I think we'll have water in 100 years.
Wonderful.
Pat'll she'll come back and see to it, I'm sure. So she'll be watching.
So Robert, thinking about housing and that ideal regarding water, what does it look like to you?
I think ideally our valley is a place of great opportunity for all of us and for our children and the future generations, and I'd hate to see it be constrained by an inability to solve water problems. So what I see as the success we're looking for is that's never the issue where somebody says we can't build a new hospital, or we can't add on to the university, or we can't bring in new employment for our families because there's a lack of water. So to me, I think we'll be successful as we continue to have the same attitude we've had these past few decades, that we solve the problems.
You know, I've never been one that has been very good at looking what the future should be or what I would think it would be. I've always kind of been one that pretty well tried to solve problems that I could see. But now I've been retired out of politics for 20 years now, and I was 29 years old when I first got elected to the Board of County Commission. I was 27 when I got elected to City Council. I was so young and naive, it was unbelievable. I didn't even know what I was doing half the time. But I look back now, and I see what Las Vegas is, and there's a lot of it I'm so very proud of. There's some things I wish we could have changed, but I'm so very proud of a lot of things. Let me give you an example that's not on water and sewer. When I was on the Board of County Commission, the Riviera had built out to the Strip. Right out on the Strip. And I said, I don't like that. From now on, I said, I went and got the votes. I said, from now on, we're not going to let another major hotel build out to the curb. They're going to stay back. And boy, we took some heat. Steve Wynn come into my office, some other casino owners, and I said, guys, I'm telling you, we don't want to become another New York where Las Vegas Boulevard is just a high rise in a canyon. Stay back. And Steve says, if you promise me you'll make everybody else do it, I'll do the same thing. The Mirage, Treasure Island, things like that started to happen, which started to make Las Vegas. You know, that's kind of something, you know, I could just see something that was going to be a problem. I didn't know what the future was going to be, but it sure turned out pretty good.
Great. So to reach that ideal, what do we need to do, or what kind of resources do we need to put in place?
To reach the ideal.
Yes.
Okay, to answer that question, and I'm going to have to go into a larger context. Southern Nevada's future is inextricably linked to the future of Arizona and to the future of California. There's no way in the water space that Nevada will succeed while California and Arizona fail, or Arizona and California succeed while Nevada fails. We are glued at the hip. So when I look out and I say there has to be a larger regional solution on the Colorado River, yes. What is being discussed now, these early conservation agreements, these early discussions about pulling together and conserving water together and leaving it behind in Lake Mead, we can't continue down the path of pointing the finger at agriculture because, I hate to say it, but we do eat. So getting rid of the finger pointing amongst ourselves, and we've made huge progress along that. And I think at some point really soon we have to turn our eyes to the ocean. I don't think there's any alternative. I think we're going to have to. That's the only place you can successfully augment the Colorado River. And conservation and reducing what you use will only go so far. It has, you're going to hit a wall and you're not going to be able to go any further. And in order to avoid that, there's going to have to be a larger think around what can possibly happen on that river that will allow us to augment that system and make it more resilient to the droughts that are invariably coming. They're going to come. It's not a question of if, it's simply a question of when.
Anyone else?
She had us looking at the ocean 25 years ago, so she's been planning a long time. We actually had ideas of how to get California more water off the ocean, where we could trade water. And, I mean, that's what forward thinking is. And yeah, I remember those talks.
Comments? Anyone else? Okay. So what lessons should we remember from the past as we shape our water future in Southern Nevada?
Oh, there's one that jumps off the page at me. Parochial bickering between entities is a death knell. What made Southern Nevada strong, what allowed Southern Nevada to be as resilient as it was a calm, thoughtful political leadership like what Jay brought to the table in the water space, Bruce Woodbury brought to the table in the flood control space, that didn't recognize boundaries and very clearly said, we really are one larger community that has these artificial boundaries. And so if we slip back into parochial bickering between entities, it will destroy this community.
And when you slip back, it's because there's no accountability. And let me share, it's kind of been a pet peeve of mine for a long time. You think about this. 100% of the population that vote, 50% are registered, 50% of those vote. So now you're down to 25% are actually the people picking your representatives. So that means 12% decide who's going to be in there to make sure that there's no bickering, that the best people in the world are there. 12% of our population are making that decision because of how lax that we've got on our vote and everything else. That's in a general election. Municipalities are even less than that.
Robert, did you have something to add?
No, I agree
Okay,
with what they're
Virginia?
saying.
I would agree with Pat. I think the jurisdictions all need to work together. Everybody needs to recognize that water is a shared resource. I think the other thing we're going to have to figure out how to do that will be a challenge is just managing the change, because I think the way people think about water is going to have to change. Just the way we consume it's going to have to change. And so I think change it always seems to be the hardest part of almost everything we do. But I think just getting people to think differently and think about working together. And she mentioned the Valentine's Day, what happened, and that was a result of everyone trying to grab as much water at once as they could. Everyone was looking out for their own needs and not really thinking about the bigger picture. And it's really hard to do that because to the most part, if you're working in a city or a county, your job is as Pat Shalmy used to say, you ride for the brand. You go out and you get as much of that, you consume as much of that resource as you can for the people who've elected you or put you in that position. So I think the change, the working together, being creative and innovative. Years ago, people used to talk about desalination plants. They go, oh, we'll never do that. It's too expensive, consumes too much energy. You wind up with acres and acres and acres of salt ponds. And now we're really talking about doing it. They were small-scale operations. So, technology's better too. But things that we used to think were inconceivable, like buying short-term excess water and pumping it back into the ground. You would have never thought about putting that much time and energy and resources into water that you might, it's not dispatchable, it's not there every day for you, but that you're going to bank that water. All of those were kind of new concepts. So I think all of those things that you would have dismissed out of hand, people now are going to have to really think seriously about. So, and that takes a paradigm shift or a change in the way you think about water. I think it's going to take a change to think about what you pay for water, because this is going to be expensive. And I'll tell you, I don't think that's bad. They used to tell us, and James will know this in engineering school, that if you make the water pressure low enough, people will consume less water. Well, people want high water pressure. And they also say, well, if you charge them more, they'll use less. And that's true. So I would say it's not an entirely bad thing that water costs a lot of money, because I think it makes you think more about how you use it and what the value of that resource is.
So are there any other comments on anything we've talked about, things that you wanted to say earlier and just did not have the opportunity?
I'm so nervous I don't know what we talked about.
Yes.
Seriously?
So what I'd like to do, I think that we've covered most of the questions that we had talked about earlier. I want you to know that we have people on the panel tonight who actually went home and did homework for this, and they actually had answers written out. We just wouldn't let them take it out of their purse. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to open the floor. This is a topic that we're all so interested in, and I know that there are a lot of questions. So if we have some questions, yes, please.
I want to applaud the Water District and the Governor's Economic Development Authority for the Water Start initiative for water innovation to create the global entrepreneurial format for this community, which I think is incredibly vital for the economic diversification. So that's number one, and I'd like to get maybe the panelists' discussion about give an overview of what WaterStar's already done in terms of technology from Australia and from around the world that's coming here within DRI and a variety of other places, having an immediate impact. And secondly, just of my own personal interest, to talk about the food implications of that and food security. And then I'll sit down and be happy to have whatever responses come.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of food security, and I alluded to it earlier. I mean, we have this knee-jerk reaction here in the urban West that every time there is a water challenge or a water issue, we say, well, it's them, it's the farmer, it's agriculture that's using all the water, it's agriculture that's the problem. If we didn't grow as much food, well, the reality is we're going to be a planet of 9 billion people. The reality is the country of Saudi Arabia has bought an enormous ranch in Arizona and is using it for nothing but to grow alfalfa and ship it back to Saudi Arabia. The biggest export client of the Imperial Irrigation District is the country of China. Diets around the world are changing. And as those diets are changing and as they're increasingly having trouble feeding their populations, their areas that have agriculture as their base are becoming more critical for it. Now, there is a next generation of agriculture that he alluded to. You go into the Negev desert in Israel, and you see the next generation of agriculture. You see oranges grown with drip irrigation. You see date palms. You see cotton grown with drip irrigation. The technologies that have come out of Israel, out of Singapore, out of places that have enormous water challenges like we do, have been phenomenal. And what WaterStart has done is created a platform for Southern Nevada to reach out across the globe and say, who has great technologies that address this or this or this problem? And we get RFPs, or WaterStart gets RFPs from around the world to address that issue. That is what MGM is using in much. They are a member of WaterStart. They are using it in order to have access to global water technologies to make themselves more resilient inside. And the fact that we are in an incredible race to be able to survive in the face of climate change, getting the best of that technology and escalating it and encouraging it and incubating it is as important as anything, and no one small area can do that. There is a global think that has been happening around it, and I think Southern Nevada has, and the governor, and I applaud Governor Sandoval for what he did. The fact that Southern Nevada stands up and says, we'll be your gateway. We'll be your gateway to the U.S. market because you have technologies that this country and these utilities need to be exposed to. I think that was a phenomenal economic development opportunity, but I think it also put Southern Nevada in a very different space in how it's viewed in the water world around the world.
Hello. I have a hypothetical question to ask, please.
Could you speak up just a tiny bit?
I have a hypothetical question to ask. If you had access to a pristine body of water and you wanted to put it on the open market to sell it to the world, what would be the first 3 steps you would take to bring that water to the world market in perhaps your new technology that you just spoke about, or if you wanted to just basically bring this special body of water and put it on the market? First 3 steps. Thank you.
Well, the first obstacle you're going to face is the local community, where it's coming from. There is no body of water that doesn't have an environmental footprint. There is no way you can move water without leaving an environmental footprint. 20% of the world's fresh water sits in the Great Lakes. It took 2 tanker ships from France coming into the Great Lakes to fill it up, to take to a bottling plant in France, to cause group hysteria of every state and province around the Great Lakes, to where they enacted a compact at the Great Lakes and literally drew a boundary around the land mass that can be served with Great Lakes water. It defies logic on many levels, but it is the most emotional, irrational subject and conversation you can have with any community. And so I have heard lots of stories. I've had lots of entrepreneurs come in who wanted to tow icebergs from Alaska, who wanted to convert oil tankers into water tankers and tank the water to Southern California. And the first thing I say to people like that is, wait a minute, guys, their plumbing goes the other way. They don't have plumbing that goes from that direction inland. It goes from inland out to the coastal communities. I mean, there is an enormous infrastructure change that has to happen within a jurisdiction that would receive that water. And they will always be out there. Do you remember Wally's River?
Yeah, went up there while they were drilling it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this gentleman thought he could hit the big water in central Nevada, and they drilled and drilled and never could, you know. There were some people who actually believed in him. I just happened to be coming back from Utah one day on a stretch of highway, and all these guys sitting out there watching this drill rig go up and down.
And it came up dry every time.
And I recognized one of them. He was a city councilman from one of our cities, and I said to my wife, stop, I want to watch, you know, and I pull over, and that's what they were doing up there drilling, and I remember that, yeah. Pat, I've been, like I said, I've been gone a long time, and this story goes back a long ways, but one of the first questions I asked, well, the Columbia River, how much water, we're 300,000 acre feet, the Columbia River dumps how much, 300,000 in how many minutes?
Oh, God, seconds.
Yeah, it's within minutes. They dump that much water. So I said, why don't we just hook a pipeline into the Columbia River, bring it to Southern Nevada? Boy, that's a no-no. You're not even, and this may, I don't know if it's true, but I was told this story. It's a federal offense to even talk about that.
It is. It's in federal legislation. The federal government may not even study it.
Yeah. So that's not even something that you can even discuss because of the environmental and those upper states and stuff. So from that point on, we had to find other ways to do different things.
Yeah, and who'd think that inhabitants around the Great Lakes would have that kind of a severe visceral reaction? And you go, seriously, people? Have you looked at the two tankers came in and filled 2 tankers and went back to France. Yes.
I'd like to thank our panelists. I also want to mention that I'm with the World Affairs Council Las Vegas, and we have hosted a number of international visitors that came here to study water, and I know Pat has met with a number of the groups that have come. So there is a lot of attention and focus on the expertise that Southern Nevada has in water conservation and what we're doing. So I do thank you guys. My question with respect to change is, what is the impact to recreational activity, water-related recreational activity, as we face these challenges, going forward in the future?
Did you say recreational?
Recreational water activities. We water ski, we do all these activities that are water related, and you mentioned, the need for change. Do you see the population changing the way we interact with water on a recreational level?
No, I think a lot of there is an absolute intersection between a lot of the environmental efforts and the recreational efforts. You can't have in-stream flows. You can't do river rafting. You have to protect rivers and streams, both for the fish and, quite honestly, human recreation. It's a big industry on the Colorado River. You go up into the Grand Canyon, you go riding those rapids and all the tributary rapids. It is a significant industry. The whole town of Flagstaff is essentially built on it. So I think water recreation will always be there. Maybe we'll have more water skiing on oceans than on fresh lake bodies.
Well, if I can just add to that, there was a time, and I know Jay will remember this, but the level of treatment from the wastewater that goes back into the lake used to have a permit that was 3031. It's 30 milligrams of, I don't even remember now, but the 1 milligram was phosphorus, and phosphorus is a fertilizer. It's what makes the lake bloom and turn green. Now they've gone to, the technology is just so much better. They're able to really reduce that phosphorus level, and the water quality, I can tell you now, from when I moved here 37 years ago, what is coming out the end of those sewage treatment plants looks like drinkable water, and the quality is pretty darn good. So I think in terms of recreation, as the lake got smaller, fortunately about the same time, technology got better, and I think we were able to keep the lake a lot cleaner than we used to be able to. And I think as technology advances, we'll be able to address keeping the water clean enough for recreational purposes.
Great question, thank you.
Yes, my name is Ed Euling. I have about 10 questions, but I'll keep it to 2. First of all,
you sound
Pat,
like the White House press corps.
That's right. And about that conflicting also. Pat, it's too bad you didn't talk about your brilliant idea for bringing water into the Salton Sea. I hope, because
somehow I saw you in the audience, and somehow I knew you were going to bring it up, so I was just going to wait for you to do that.
Okay. But the 2 questions I've narrowed it down to are conservation and business. Basically, conservation, we talk about conservation by the Southern Valley Water Authority. It's basically a farce, in one word. Because we have an allocation of 300,000 acre-feet. We use 220,000 acre-feet. So there's an excess of 80,000 acre-feet that the people of Southern Nevada can serve. What do we do with that water? We send it down to California for $300 an acre-foot, while we charge people here in Southern Nevada $1,300 an acre-foot. And what does California do with it? They raise alfalfa. It takes about 5 feet of water to raise a field of alfalfa. They have tens of thousands of acres of alfalfa that water goes to. And no state wastes more water than California. And yet we give them this gift. And regarding the business aspect, yes, Mr. Wynn gave $100,000 to cooperate with the plan. But Virginia here can walk into a meeting, as she did in 2012, and say, yeah, we liked Pat's plan of only raising the rates of hotels, resort hotels. She's the head of the Resort Association. We want to raise the rate of water to hotels 3%, but we want to raise the rates that small businesses pay and small landowners and churches pay 200% for their it's a fee on the water, on the what do you call it, the fire suppression systems.
Okay. So
and so his $100,000 is making him $100,000 a week.
Okay, so let us answer.
Wait a second.
It's not accurate.
Hey, yeah, wait a second, Ed. I don't know what the question was. It sounded like a statement, but I'm not sure what your question is.
Okay,
what's your question?
This is the other side. Tell the people the other side. And there's other sides to every aspect. For example,
Ed, in all disrespect, you've been around a long time. You could take hours debating your theory compared to other theories, and that happens all the time. So it's not a simple question. There's your theory and there's other theories.
Yeah. Would you please explain how the political forces here in the town step all over the citizens of the city? And I could go into at least 5 other examples of that.
Okay, good. So can we just talk about the difference in how businesses are treated and how everyone else is treated when it comes to water usage? Thank you so much for the question.
In terms of the commodity rate, there's no difference.
Okay.
Unlike many communities across the country, we don't charge one rate for residential and one rate for commercial. It's all about meter size and it's all about volumes used. And as you step through the tiers, you pay more. The issue is alluding to is fire lines. And it became weak. Let me step back here. From 2008 to 2012, the Water District and the Water Authority weathered the storm of the worst recession and never raised a rate. And the reason was, quite frankly, the funding plan that Robert helped put together that allowed us to sock away enough money to where we could weather through the storm. But in 2012, we had to raise the rates. So when we did, We also needed to look at what are we paying for. People don't pay for water. They're paying for the infrastructure. You know, there's always that great debate, water is a basic human right. And what I have said over and over again is I agree. Here's your bucket, go to Lake Mead, knock yourself out. What you don't have a basic human right to is a very multi-billion-dollar infrastructure system that pumps that water out of Lake Mead, treats it, and delivers it. Now, one of the things that we have built an enormous infrastructure around is fire lines. Let me give you the classic example, a warehouse. A warehouse has a tiny little 3/4-inch service line for maybe 3 sinks and 4 toilets, right? But it has an 8-inch fire line. Well, guess how all the backup infrastructure is sized? It's not sized for that little 3/4-inch service line. It's sized for that 8-inch fire line. And for all these years, all the customers were subsidizing that fire service. So as we had to reach out, we had to say to the board, there is something you really need to consider, and that is charging a portion of the facility's charge for those fire line charges, for all that fire line infrastructure, because that's what the authority does. The authority builds infrastructure and pays debt service on that infrastructure. So how do you assign appropriate values and who has to pay what? There is no harder question for a water utility than who pays what for water under what circumstances. It is, and you can never win. You're gonna be wrong no matter what you do.
So Virginia, did you also want to comment?
I think Pat covered that pretty well. You are paying for all that infrastructure so that if you have that little 3/4-inch line and you have a fire and you have to meet 4,000, 5,000 gallons per minute to put out that fire, you need to pay, you need to participate in the infrastructure for that system. So,
and I know people hate to hear this, and Virginia shouldn't be the one to say this, but gaming subsidized this community for a very, very long time in the water space. They pay such an enormous charge for their hardware, for their infrastructure costs, that what they pay has muted much more painful rate increases for the rest of the community. And they went along with it decades. And in 2012, they were hurting just like everybody else was. So the question was, and they pay such enormous bills that a 20-cent increase to somebody who doesn't use more water than in the first tier is an enormous percentage of their overall bill. Whereas 3%, it can be hundreds of thousands of dollars extra in water costs to a big property, but because it is relative to percentage-wise, if you talk about percentage increases, what the rest of their bill has been and how much of an increase it is from that base, it's a smaller percentage. It's a numbers game.
Thank you, Ed. I'd like to have the next person ask a question.
Hi, my name is Jackie Gallardo. I'm a fourth-year architecture student from UNLV. I just had a question on having water 100 years from now. With the current administration's unwillingness to admit climate change and their public influence, I was just wondering how far do you think it'll set us back as far as our resilience, and how far it would take for our public policy to continue to grow and have our community grow?
We've got to end the religious debate over climate change. It's got to end. And I was very disappointed to see the Trump administration leave the Paris Accord. But what the Paris Accord wasn't a yes or no on climate change. Does it exist or does it not exist? It was a global pathway to get to begin to mitigate it. I personally would not have agreed with leaving it, but all it means is that you're going to have to find yet another pathway. The challenge has been, and I learned one big lesson. All the elected officials that stand up and say, we don't believe in climate change, that's not what they're saying. What they're saying is, I have a constituency that is losing their jobs, that can't feed their families. I have people that are either in the coal business or in the power business or in some associated business. I come from Louisiana, I come from Kentucky, I come from Virginia, and my constituency is starving to death. You didn't give them a pathway to a new economy as you began to address climate change. For us to be able to wrap our heads around it and do what needs to be done in the energy space, we need to get back to basics and figure out what is it going to take to change the economy of the little town in West Virginia that's a coal mining town now. And you're not going to put them in high tech. Most of them never even graduated from high school. They've been generationally in the coal mining business. So what manufacturing are you going to bring into there with jobs that these individuals can do? When that starts happening, and these elected officials can go home and face their constituency and not have to defend why they put them out of work, the conversation will end. This is not a religious argument about does it exist or doesn't it exist. It really isn't.
Good evening, and thank you. Recently, over the past few years, there was some discussion about efforts to pump groundwater from rural areas surrounding Nevada. Is that still under discussion? And if so, what effect does that have on the residents of those areas and the environment in those areas?
That is a greatly debated issue in Nevada, and yes, it is still on the table. It is the safety net. The strategy for Southern Nevada is to do everything within the Colorado River framework, whether it's augmentation, whether it's agreements to avoid building it. But if one day, for some reason, it has to be built, we know it can be built in an environmentally sustainable way. Water agencies have changed, and everybody points to Owens Valley. It's very different from Owens Valley, where this isn't 1920, 1930, 1940. Just because you built a well and you are taking water from it doesn't mean you pump 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. It means you're going to have to let it rest. And when conditions are such that the groundwater table needs to be rested or be artificially injected with additional water supplies, then that's what's going to happen. The valleys that we are going into, there are virtually no inhabitants. The communities, be it Ely, be it Pioche, or be it Alamo, they sit in basins we're nowhere near. So this is the same conversation that California is having around the Bay Delta with the communities that are, quote, the area of origin, being violently opposed to it and pointing to all the environmental Armageddon that's going to happen. These are the kind of conversations that are going to leave us very flat-footed when the worst of the climate impacts hit, because it's going to leave us without options, and we'll have nobody to blame but ourselves.
You can't ask other states to help you with your water problem. These other states with millions of acre feet over the years, and this is going back when I was there, you can't ask them to help you, because what they say is, you haven't even solved it with your own state. Your own state's not participating with you. So that's kind of what started this, that we have to have a plan with our own state. And over the past 25 years now that this has been, has it been 25 years?
Oh, yeah.
25 years now. A lot of those wells where we thought there would be harm have been withdrawn. There's a lot of new technology that if it does start to harm the environment or other things, there's ways to find that out to where it's not going to harm. And in fact, it could very well, I mean, I'm from some of those small counties. They're dying. This could help some of those small counties with jobs and different things if it's done right.
Is this my last question? Please.
So when it comes to the growth of the city, and its critics, do you see, or what are your first overall like general responses when you have your critics that say, how can you justify building in the desert? And then also,
as opposed to Miami or New Orleans.
Yeah. I mean, this is my hometown. I want to see it grow, you know. But like, what are your first general go-to responses for that? And then, when it comes to the overall infrastructure of maintaining the water in the city, how do you see an overall limit to that eventual growth without having to add major infrastructures that's in the billions or whatever X amount of money?
With the addition of the third intake, there will be no additional, and the pumps that are being put in now, there will be no additional large infrastructure that will be needed from to bring Colorado River water into southern Nevada. The completion of the third intake, the building of those pump stations to pump from the bottom of Lake Mead, that will make us extremely robust and resilient. The growth question is one that is like, you know, it's an impossible question to answer. And everybody thinks the easy thing is to just stop growth. We stopped growth in 2008. How'd we like it? I mean, we're on a planet that's going to have 9 billion people on it. People are going to live in deserts. They're going to live in Israel. They're going to live in Jordan. They're going to live in the Gobi Desert. People are going to live in deserts. And there's no such thing as a safe place for the effects of climate change. Whether it's hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, or droughts, or fires. Pick your poison. But there is not one spot in the continental United States or outside anywhere that isn't going to be affected by one of those 5 factors. Personally, drought's the easiest one to manage around. It really is. My friend who runs Miami Water right now, I feel for him. What he's going through right now is inconceivable to me. That is flood defined in a way Virginia could never even have imagined. So, yes, we will live in deserts, and people are going to live in deserts. And there are always going to be those that say, well, we wouldn't have a problem if we didn't grow. Well, you get to pick your problem.
As you can see, Pat and I, we agree on a lot of things. Sometimes our politics are very different, so I want to state up front, I'm very conservative when I say this, but I'm very conservative. But when you talk about growth, over the thousands of years on the earth, there's been migrations, and you can go back through history and see the migrations of the people and where they've migrated. Well, there's a great migration going on now, and it's coming from the south. And, you know, right or wrong, I'm not in politics to determine that because I don't know all the facts, but that migration is going to happen. They're fleeing poverty, they're fleeing unstable governments, they're fleeing fear, and they're coming to the only source that they think is safe. So do we need to be ready? We need to do everything we can to be ready. Now, whether it's right or wrong, I'm not going to state that. But what I'm saying is you better be prepared, because that great migration is not just for the next 10 or 15 years, it's for the next 100 years or more.
So I'd like to...
Can I say one more thing before we
please,
close?
yes.
I see a lot of friends out there that, you know, 20 years ago I dealt with in county, and Robert, you know, I can't tell you, it's not just Robert, but it's his family, his name, and what he's done for us here. But the Taberti family, can you stand up? I just would like to...
Yeah.
He and his brother, brothers have done wonderful things for this community, and his father. And it may even go back to your grandfather, if I remember, but I'm not sure. But they've done tremendous things for this community for a lot of years, and they deserve a lot of credit, because I've been around now in the development business for almost 35 years. I've seen a lot of people who didn't treat this community very good, but these two families did.
So are there any final comments Virginia, Robert, any final comments from anyone here on the panel? I'd like to show our appreciation to this wonderful, wonderful panel. Now I'd like to invite Callie McCarthy to come forward. She's our development person at UNLV Libraries. And as she's coming forward, the panelists can now exit the stage, please. Thank you so much. This was amazing.
Hello. Okay. I think that I would love to give another round of applause to our panelists tonight. What a fantastic, truly fantastic conversation about something that is so deeply vital to the Southern Nevada community and obviously to the world. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kelly McCarthy. I'm the Development Director at UNLV University Libraries. That means I'm responsible for raising the funds necessary to support something else that is deeply vital to our community, and that's the library's Building Las Vegas project. We are forever grateful to the Tiberti family for launching the first year of this project, and we've accomplished so much. That was this past year. It was a $150,000 gift, and especially to Ronaldo Tiberti, who has begun working closely with the library to document and preserve his family's business archives, and it's been, I think, a good process so far. So Ronaldo, when we have his thumbs up, we feel good. So, and Ronaldo and his support has inspired other firms to come forward and donate their business archives, and it's an exciting project. I'm not asking anyone here to make a $150,000 gift unless you'd like to, but if you care about the community and the life that we've built here, and you want to make sure that we can preserve it so that students, like all of the wonderful students we've had here tonight asking such thoughtful, just incredible questions, makes me so proud to be at UNLV. So faculty can teach it, and there's a lot of UNLV faculty here also, and professionals and family members can study it, enjoy it, and think about the kinds of questions and issues we've discussed tonight. I'm asking you to support what you all care about, and you're all here tonight because you care about that. As we move into year 2 of the project, there's so much more that the library wants to collect. We need oral histories, and some of you, we want your oral histories, and we're not going to be shy about it. We need collections from architecture firms as well as companies and organizations that focus on lighting, solar energy, water, real estate, the city's environmental health, and then we need to make sure that we do all the work to make sure that this is available online using this expertise of our special collections and our digital collections staff. And that requires dollars, and that's why we need your support. I like to make donating fun, and I think that if you love something, then donating is fun. So if you're able to make a donation of $250 tonight, we have, we have these fun coffee mugs. I ordered them in a size that I would like to drink enough coffee. You know, you might want to drink more, but you can fill up twice. But it has a great image that from the project and that we've been using to market the initiative. Or we have these really fun flash drives. It's a fun little bulldozer. It comes apart, and it already has, it's preloaded with 10 images from the project. So either one of those for a $250 donation or for $500, we'll do both. And I come from PBS, so this is how we did things, and it was pretty effective. It's pretty effective. But I also like to make donating easy, and so we've developed these self-sealed envelopes that Laurel and others are passing out. Pat, our associate dean, is passing out. You can make your gift using these. They just seal right up in whatever amount feels right to you. You can give your envelopes to me or to our 2 board members in the back, Betty and Shirley. Betty and Shirley, Hi. And they also are the ones with the mugs and the flash drives, and they also have more information about the project. So you can see them, and, you know, Betty said to me tonight, just tell everybody it's so easy, just give the envelope to me and I'll take care of it. And I said, okay, I'll say that, because that's true. I know the people who built Las Vegas, which a lot of you are part of that community tonight, know that it takes teamwork to get things done. So tonight, I say let's build this Building Las Vegas project. Let's keep it going. So donate, support what you love, and help UNLV University Libraries and the expertise that we have at our library preserve our great city. I want to thank, again, our sponsors, AIA Las Vegas. They've been so generous to us, UNLV Downtown Design Center, Southern Glaciers Spirits and Wine, our panelists, the UNLV University Library staff, our board members. We have a lot of board members here tonight, UNLV faculty, staff, students, our donors, and to all of you for coming tonight and showing your support. Our dean, our new dean, Maggie Farrell, mentioned that our next event is our Gold Party, which will celebrate the 50th anniversary of UNLV University Library's Special Collection and Archives, and Building Las Vegas is a project of that Special Collections and Archives. It's Saturday, November 4th, it's coming up, so save the date. Invites will be going out shortly. We invite everyone to attend, and we hope you'll join us. And thank you for attending our final panel in the series. We appreciate you being here. Thank you.